Welcome to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the Pulp Net, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Online at thepulp.net. In this Pulp Event podcast, Jim Beard surveys the comic books published by Fiction House. The talk was recorded on Friday, August 5, 2022, at PulpFest 50 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, as Mike already said, this is about comic books. So to quote Steve Rogers in that elevator, before we get started, does anybody want to get out? I'm an unapologetic comic book fan, but I was really excited when Mike asked me to do this talk because as much as I'm a Golden Age comic book fan, I love the Justice Society of America through National and all of that, I wasn't really familiar with the Fiction House output, so it really gave me an opportunity to dig into a part of comics history that I wasn't really up on. But even better, what I saw was this symbiosis between pulp and comic books, and that's like how I feel. My father was a huge pulp fan and loved the Shadow Radio show and all of that, and he really infused in me a love for the pulps, but also a love for comic books. He was kind of right in there in that time when it was all shifting and pulps were on the way out and comic books were getting bigger. So he really infused me with that. So I'm excited to talk about this era and a company that was doing both. Fiction House started in 1921. I'm not going to go into Fiction House, the pulp publisher, because you're going to hear plenty about that this weekend. But Fiction House, the comic book company, produced work from 1938 to 1954, which is a pretty respectable run. They had a total number of 31 series and produced 826 issues, individual issues of comic books. To give you a little idea of where they fell when they started doing comic books within the bigger comic book scene, they actually started out in September of 1938, but an Action Comics #1. The first appearance of Superman was June of 1938. So they were right around that same time when they kicked off. So let's see, the guy to the left is John Glenister, the head of Fiction House. And then the guy on the right is Thurwin T. Scott, the publisher, who then oversaw the comic books. And that is, of course, Glenister's son-in-law. And that is the best picture that I could find of that guy, I'm sorry. The story goes that they were interested in getting into comic books because that was a huge growing thing at that time. And they supposedly got a call from the Eisner-Iger shop. That would be Will Eisner, a name that should be familiar to a lot of people, and Jerry Iger, who in around 1936 were really working to become packagers, that they would produce whole comic books, do everything, and then that could be published by a company. Supposedly they paid a call on Fiction House and struck a deal that they would start putting together comic books. So I'm sure that was probably a very attractive deal to Fiction House, where they didn't have to do that themselves. They had professionals like Eisner and Iger coming in. To me, when I was really looking through all of this stuff, it seemed to me that the mission statement, if there was one, for Fiction House was to not reinvent the wheel. It was do the comic books like the pulps. And as we go along, you'll see how really connected they were, even sometimes literally just duplicating a pulp title and making it into a comic book form. What I really want to concentrate on, this is not going to be an exhaustive look. I want to give you more or less a brief look and really hit the high points of Fiction House. and especially what they call the Big Six. They had 6 titles out of those 31 series, or some of them are one-shots, that they produced that were their big sellers, and I'd like to go through those. So here's where it all began. Jumbo Comics, number 1, 1938. It ran 167 issues, more than any other Fiction House comic book. Sheena was the big draw. She started in Jumbo Comics. Basically, this whole first issue was already done. Iger and Eisner had produced work for a British magazine called Wags, and they basically just transferred everything over to this. The thing that was really interesting to me about this is it was tabloid size. It was not the standard golden age comic book size at this point. It was actually bigger, what they called tabloid size, and that's why it's called Jumbo, not like Jumbo the Elephant. It was literally because it was a big book. Oh, so I love this. There were 3 different stories in Jumbo number 1 by 3 guys, Kurt Davis, Fred Sand, and Jack Curtis. Except if anybody really knows this, it's really fascinating because those guys were actually one guy, and he has a somewhat recognizable name of Jack Kirby. This is Jack Kirby's first comic book work. He had illustrations published in Wild Boy magazine, but this was supposedly his actual first comic book work. He did Diary of Dr. Haggard, the Wilton of the West, and part 1 of an adaptation of Count of Monte Cristo. But I love that because he used 3 different names, but all in the same book. So back then it would have made, whoever was reading that, you would think that it was 3 different guys doing it. One of the other things that I really want to hit as we go through these series is the incredible names that worked for Fiction House, or worked for Iger and Eisner, and in turn worked for Fiction House. I was just amazed at. Now, some of them weren't necessarily big at that time, but their careers grew and they became more recognizable. So, in Jumbo number 2, which is the red one there, a guy named Bob Powell had work in there. He did art on Sheena and Mr. Mystic, but later he actually was the co-writer, I guess co-creator of Blackhawk for Quality. I almost said DC. Well, DC, and I love this. He's considered one of the creators of the Mars Attacks trading cards. I love that. And then over here for Jumbo number 4, Lou Fine had work in there, and of course he was the artist known for the original Blue Beetle, the Black Condor, Dollman, and Uncle Sam, all for Quality. In this book he did Wilton of the West. I guess he kind of took over from Jack Kirby. So Jumbo number 9 became regular size. So they had 8 issues of tabloid size. Jumbo number 9 became regular size, and just a few more names that worked on Jumbo Comics. A guy named Bob Kane, might sound familiar to you, except he was doing a strip called Peter Pup. Bob actually was doing more humorous stuff before Batman came along, but he actually did Peter Pup in issues 1 through 25. Also, Matt Baker, who is considered the first very important African-American artist in the comic books, the first one that actually had success in it. He went on to do Phantom Lady, and then also what is, to some people, considered the first graphic novel, a book called It Rhymes with Lust. And don't ask me what the word is that rhymes with lust, because I don't know. There's an example of Peter Pup on the left, and then Matt Baker doing Sky Girl. And yes, one of the things that Fiction House Comics was known for, and really known for, was good girl art. And for very good girl reason. So here is Sheena, who is the real star here. And as Mike said, a couple things about Sheena that are really fascinating. She predates Wonder Woman. Not by very much, but she does actually predate Wonder Woman, and she is the first female comic book character with her own title, her name is in the title, and that was published by Jumbo. She is in every issue of Jumbo magazine, and then she got her spin-off in 1942, and that lasted for 10 years. One of their other big characters was, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, is Ka'anga, which is another jungle type of character, almost as popular, I think, as Sheena. The second one of the big six is Jungle number 1, and that lasted for 163 episodes. Began in January 1904 and lasted all the way till summer of 54. Couple of big names that appeared in Jungle Comics. George Tuska, fans of Marvel Comics will recognize that name. He worked on the original Captain Marvel for Marvel, and then really I probably know him best for Iron Man. That's number 8 on the end, I believe. Number 7 it featured work by Nick Cardy, who much later on went to fame and fortune for DC with Teen Titans. And then Jim Mooney had work in number 11 of Jungle, and he went on to be probably pretty well known for Supergirl. And a guy that's near and dear to my heart. This is, if you don't know it already, the work of Fletcher Hanks, who to me is the original gonzo artist of the comic books. This is a guy that only worked from 1939 to 1941, but did everything himself, writing, art, lettering. And if you aren't familiar with this guy's work, it's the most insane comic book work ever. And I couldn't describe it even if I had an entire panel to talk about this guy's work. But he did Phantoma for Jungle Comics, but he did a lot of his other characters under the Fiction House banner. If you ever get a chance, look this guy's work up. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. I mean, this is pretty tame what you're seeing here, but he had a lot of very strange ideas about how to take care of the criminals and the bad guys in there. You just didn't capture them. His heroes would do things like remove their heads and blow them up to giant size and all of that. All right, so the third of our big six is Wings number 1, and of course that was to emulate the Wings Pulp magazine that Fiction House was doing. This had 124 issues and ran from 1940 to 1954. Murphy Anderson, another name that might be very recognizable to comic book fans, had his very first comic book work in Wings magazine in number 48. Not only an incredible penciler of his own, but really probably even known better for his inking, and inking over the very, very famous Kurt Swan, considered, like, to me, the Superman artist. When they worked together, they were actually known as Swanderson. I always love that. Okay, so a few people who worked on Wings through the years. Art Petty worked in number 2, and he worked on JSA stories, Justice Society stories, for All American. He is the co-creator later of Phantom Lady, and then worked on Jan of the Jungle. Number 84 featured work by Morris Whitman, who probably known for Atomic Mouse and Atomic Rabbit, Wyatt Earp, and then later went on to work on the Warren comic magazines like Creepy and Eerie. And then number 129 featured work by Jack Abel, who was another one of the Superman inkers in the 60s and 70s. And I love this. He inked the very first Wolverine story over Herb Trimpe's pencils. I love this one. So we move on to the fourth of the big six, Fight Comics. And Fiction House had the pulp called Fight Stories. This ran 86 issues, so we're dropping down now with how long these ran. But this ran from 40 to 54, 86 issues. To try to describe the comic book is that it had a little bit of everything. Pretty much almost every genre was represented in Fight Comics, including superheroes. This was kind of interesting. I was looking up Fiction House superheroes, and they're all like public domain now. There's not really any superheroes that came out of the Fiction House stuff that really became well known, that really would have a recognizable name. There's some really fascinating concepts within there, and I've known people who have grabbed onto those now and worked on them because they're public domain. But I just wanted to stress that Fight Comics was pretty much an anything goes type of comic. In number 7 on that end, featured work by Art Saaf, S-A-A-F, who worked for DC, Fiction House, Gold Key, Harvey, and Quality. Number 70 in the middle featured early work by Dick Giordano, who another huge favorite of mine. He went on to become Charlton Comics editor and then made the move over to DC and did a lot of inking. He might actually be known more for his inking. And then number 75, I have that up there again, and we had already talked about him, but featured work by Matt Baker. Once again, another comic book that's pretty much just emulating the pulp thing. Like I said, no reinventing the wheel. They were doing things that they were already very comfortable with doing. Planet Comics number 1 is considered the first full science fiction comic where the whole thing was all science fiction. It ran for 73 issues. It was a spin-off of the Pulp magazine, January 1940 through winter of 53. And if there was any home for good girl art at Fiction House Comics, it was this book. Interestingly enough, it is not just damsel in distress and burly muscular hero rescuing that damsel. There is a whole lot of examples of the reverse of that in a time where that really wasn't the norm. Fiction House Comics are considered pre-feminist before that was ever a thing, that they not only had that representation on covers of that reversal of roles where there was a strapping female who was like the hero of the scene. They actually had a lot of female characters who were not shrinking violets. Sheena being one of the great examples of that, but there are plenty more. So if there are anybody who's looking for that in Golden Age comics, look no further than Fiction House. Will Eisner actually did early covers for Planet Comics, so he wasn't just working in the office. He was actually doing some artwork for them. Planet Comics number 13 featured work by the great Reed Crandall, who went on to do Black Hawk for Quality and a lot of EC Comics work. And he also did his first comic book art for Fiction House. So a lot of these guys, this is where they found their first work. Number 23 featured work by Lee Elias, who was known for the Black Cat at Harvey. If you're familiar with the Black Cat Marvel character, that's much later on. This is the original Black Cat character. He also worked for Timely, which of course was the precursor to Marvel Comics. And for DC, he worked on the Jay Garrick Golden Age Flash character and is considered a creator of the villain, the Fiddler. And then Planet Comics number 42, again feature work by Murphy Anderson. This is kind of interesting because I couldn't dig down and really confirm this, but Dr. Jerry Bales, who's considered one of the preeminent historians of comic books, had a legendary book that was the Who's Who of American comic books. He said that Planet Comics featured work by a very recognizable name to all of us, Walter B. Gibson, and Frank Belknap Long. And I would assume everybody's familiar with him, being, especially if you're a Lovecraft fan, he was considered a very good friend and mentor to H.P. Lovecraft. I could not confirm that. I'm trusting Dr. Bales, the late Dr. Bales, but if that's true, that's pretty cool that the Shadows, Walter B. Gibson actually did writing work for that. And what are we on, number 5 or no, this is number 6. So we get down to Ranger Comics, the last of the big 6. It ran for 58 issues, which is not bad, December 42 through winter 53. I love this because so many comic books changed titles or picked up numbering from another book. There was all these wild and crazy things that doesn't seem to make much sense to us today, but at some point it made sense to somebody. This book actually began as a comic for Fiction House called Rangers of Freedom Comics, and then it ran as Rangers, Rangers Comics, and then it was just called Rangers. It featured a pretty popular character named Firehair, which was a Western character. Rangers are pretty much a war comic. Number 10 on that side featured work by Graham Ingalls, who worked on a lot of EC books, and number 16 featured work by Ruben Moriera, who did Tarzan comic book work, and then the character Roy Raymond for DC. And not only was Fiction House known for its female characters, but actually for female creators, and probably one of the most prominent of them, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with this name, is Lily Renee. She was one of the first female comic book artists. She has a fascinating backstory if you want to look her up. She was Austrian, and she actually escaped from the Nazis to come to the United States and be a comic book artist. So once we're past the big 6, I want to give you some flavor of what else Fiction House produced. And again, they hit the genres that you wouldn't have expected back in the golden age of time. So they had westerns, books like Longbow, one just called Indians, one just called Apache, and then there's our Firehair. So not only was Firehair in Rangers, but then she also had her own book. I think almost all the Fiction House covers are just fantastic. If you really look through the spread of Golden Age comic book covers, I really think that they had some really top-notch work that probably really stood out on the stands to kids. They had their war comics, so Warbirds, Jet Aces, and then of course Planet Comics. I put this up here. These last two. Do you see anything familiar? Yeah. Isn't that fun? I love when this happens. So they took the Jet from Jet Aces. Now, this is not Fiction House over here, this Planet Comics. This is actually a comic company called H. John Edwards, who was a guy, of course, who was Australian, and he was producing both original and reprints. But they actually got a hold of that art and reused the Jet. And I love it because the other Jets are gone, and now that Jet is fighting flying saucers for the Australian version of Planet Comics. It's just one of those, things that they could have gotten away with then, but nobody would sit still for that today. I love this title. This is probably my favorite title of any Fiction House book. Man-O Mars. Not Man of Mars, but Men of Mars. I just love that cover too. That's obviously the She-Hulk down here. Yeah, and John Hunter of the Marsmen. That was 1953. It was one issue. I mean, it was like such a cool title that it blew everybody's minds, and they couldn't do another issue of it. But that happened a lot back in the day, where there was literally just one issue of something. This is another fun one, The Monster. It's literally just called The Monster, and it was only 2 issues back then. That was also in 1953. Knockout Adventures, that was 53, 54. It was like winter 53, 54. Again, just one issue. And that says it features Rip Carson. This is a really fascinating comic book. When I really started digging into this one, it's like it made me want to find these. There was only 4 issues of this. It ran from 46 to 47. And what the main story did was it was a comic book adaptation of big movies, or current movies then. They adapted things like the movie Big Town, White Tie and Tails. I don't know what kid would want to read the comic book adaptation of White Tie and Tails, but I'm sure some. And then I love this one. They actually did a comic book adaptation of Love Laughs at Andy Hardy. I could see me buying that and then quickly trading it to some kid down the street. That's another oddball one. Toyland Comics in 1947. Only 3 issues. It was described as fantasy stories for kids. And then First Christmas was a one-shot, 1953, and it was a 3-dimensional comic. And you did get 3D glasses with it. This is a Kelly Freas cover on this one. You can't really see it that well. It's too bad, because for such an incredible artist, it's kind of obscured with that weird shape, and it's kind of dark in this one. They did a lot of 3D one-shots. 3D Circus in 1953. Again, you got the glasses, just one issue, and then, I mean, if you have Sheena all over the place, I mean, why not have, right? 3D Sheena. Yeah, I can tell you that one sold very well with the little boys. That featured reprints that they, obviously just did the 3D process on. And I love this one. I wrote this in my notes. Rank has its privileges. So Will Eisner was able to put a Spirit comic book through Fiction House. It was 5 issues, 1952 to 54. And what it did is it just reprinted the work from the newspapers, the supplements, his special section or whatever. But an early example of reprinting that stuff, but through Fiction House. So here's what happened to Fiction House and how this story ends. They produced their last comics in 1954, and for people who really know 1954 and comic books history, that is, of course, the introduction of the dreaded Comics Code Authority. There was a lot of kerfuffle about the impact of comic books on children, most of it trumped up, and led by an interesting guy named Frederick Wertham. Interestingly enough, Fiction House was one of the companies targeted by Wertham. And, of course, for what? For the sexy women in their covers and in their books. They were specifically singled out for that. So if you're not familiar what happened, to avoid a lot of trouble, and the comic book companies got together and decided to create a body that they were basically going to police themselves so that the government didn't police them. And a whole bunch of rules were drawn up, and comic books kind of had their teeth taken out by that point. And so Fiction House decided that it was just no longer a good environment in the comic books industry to be publishing comic books, and they published their last that very same year. And that was the end of Fiction House Comics, but an incredible to me corner of comic book history. And that's that. Thank you. I won't be taking any questions. I'm sorry. No, I'll try. Like I said, this was a thing that was new to me. So if there are any questions, I will give it the old college try, and I'll probably embarrass myself. Were you raising your hand? Oh, then put it down. No questions. Whew, I did a good job. Oh no, David Saunders is asking me a question. I'm gonna fluff this one. What?
I just wanted to. Of maybe like 90 names that you mentioned of artists.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, in terms of research and stuff, like 80 of them were pulp artists also. Just in case it's just for your information.
I admit it, I was concentrating on the guys that went on to really have a name in comic books, so I'm glad that you brought that up.
In comic books, they actually were working in pulp.
Okay.
People you were mentioning, I mean, almost all.
Okay.
There are plenty illustrations for regular pulp that they do also.
Well, that just shows that this pulps and comic books,
But it wasn't all happening off-site at the Iger Eisner studio, like shop, which it seems like it was. But they actually were also working freelance for the pulps and guys, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, very much so. Yes?
I love Fiction House comic books, and one thing that I've noticed about them that is very different from pretty much every other publisher, I've noticed that the cover artwork has a lot more depth and vivid color than pretty much everyone else, almost as if they had like a grayscale process added to the normal just 4-color process. And the inside covers were usually printed with 2 colors, which no other publisher did. Do you know anything about that? Is that a relic of the pulp?
No, I would assume so, but I did, like I said, when I was going through everything, I just noticed that the quality of the covers is just amazing through all of them,
Up from everybody else.
I'd like to think that Fiction House, wanted the best looking covers on the stands, but I don't really know, if that was how purposeful that was if they did that. But yes, the color work, and even on these images that I pulled up, some of the colors are just amazing on those, especially the Planet comics.
At Windy City, Roger Hill spoke about T.T. Scott. I believe he did an interview with him. And Scott, and I've read this elsewhere, on the pulps and the comics, he approved almost all the covers.
Okay.
So I think that he knew that they were very important to selling both the magazines and the comic books.
So they're the same guy who's overseeing the pulp covers, and I could see why that happened then. Thank you, Mike. Yes.
Your Lily Renee comment about her being one of the first comic female writers.
Artist, Lily Renee, yeah.
It was really intriguing. She's still alive.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I hope that we've gotten every bit of her story out of her by now. But again, I would urge everybody, if you're interested in that at all, to really look into again her story about how she escaped the Nazis in Austria and came here and really is so important in the development of women in the comic book industry. Lily Renee with the accent mark on there.
I think there was recently an art show, maybe in New York, did you know, with her work?
I think I did know that.
I read something about that somewhere
If you want to start somewhere, comics historian Trina Robbins has a lot to say about the fiction house presentation of women, and that would be a really great place to start if you're intrigued also by all of the strong female characters they had, and then that really incredible phenomenon where there was almost just as many women saving the day on covers as men. God, I keep doing that.
I'm glad you did, but I've noticed that as well. On the pulps as well, on Planet Comics, you've often had a woman saving a man.
Yeah. I would.
On Planet Stories,
I would love to see the numbers, like the sales numbers. Does anything change when they have a woman saving the day on it from, just like DC figured out that putting a gorilla on the cover and the sales, shot up. So, thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to a Pulp Event podcast, brought to you by the PulpNet, your link to the online world of the pulp magazines for over 25 years. Please visit us online at thepulp.net. Also, look for the PulpNet on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps. This Pulp Event podcast is copyright 2022 by William P. Lampkin, all rights reserved.